All right, let's go ahead and get started. First things first, I want to thank everyone for joining us today from across the country and around the world. I'm Michael Higgs, the Virtual Programs Manager here at Conscious Capitalism. And on behalf of the whole CCI team, I just want to take an opportunity to thank you for joining us today to learn and grow in community. Today, we're excited to be sharing space with Michael Muthukrishna and Rand Stagen. As many of you know, Conscious Capitalism is a global movement of CEOs, presidents, founders, board members, entrepreneurs, and thought leaders from diverse industries, backgrounds, and perspectives who are committed to the shared purpose of elevating humanity through business. We were founded in 2008 as a 501c3, and we provide a community of active operating leaders, a platform to share practical advice and tools on how our principles are integrated into different organizations and within various industries. Our community of conscious capitalists offers best practices and business strategies on how the philosophy is applied to create sustainable success within one's business, leading to systemic change and impact in the world. Several times a month, we offer virtual gatherings like these as a way for our community to see how this philosophy takes shape in the leadership journeys and business practices of those in our networking community. Just a few housekeeping details. Today's session is going to run for about 45 minutes. Michael and Rand will be in conversation for about 25 to 35, and then we're going to transition to Q&A. So at any point during the conversation, feel free to use the Q&A feature to drop your questions in, and we will have time to get to those. So add them in throughout today's conversation. Now, to kick things off, if you asked researcher, author, and professor of economic psychology, Michael Muthukrishna, what makes humans unique from the other species on our planet, he would answer, our ability to create culture, our ability to pass down knowledge, skills, and traditions from generation to generation. It's a significant part of what makes us uniquely human. Michael's answer doesn't stop there, though. In his new book, A Theory of Everyone, a title that draws from the theory of everything in physics, Michael presents that our human experience in its entirety, including culture, but also aspects like energy and innovation, can help solve many of the global challenges we face today. In today's conversation, Michael will be joined by Conscious Capitalism board member Rand Stagen to provide some insights from across the sciences and humanities on how combining aspects of human behavior, culture, society with life science principles can be used to help solve problems like polarization, inequity, and end the energy crisis. While the challenges we face as a species and across the planet are critical, this conversation is going to help us take a step back, simplify the abstract ideas that often cloud solutions that are within our reach, and craft a blueprint to chart a collective path toward a better tomorrow for everyone. I do want to get a jump right into the bios here. Michael Muthukrishna is an associate professor of economic psychology, STICERD, Developmental Economics Group affiliate, Data Science Institute affiliate, and founder of Culturalytic at the London School of Economics. Dr. Muthukrishna has won several awards for his research, which integrates a variety of topics, including innovation, corruption, and navigating diverse cultural differences. He's been invited to speak at large companies and small around the world, governments and NGOs, and at leading centers of economic excellence, including Harvard, MIT, Stanford, and Oxford. Dr. Muthukrishna shares the science of human and cultural evolution, makes the science of human and cultural evolution more accessible through animations, videos, documentaries, and other popular media. His research is informed by his educational background in engineering and psychology, with graduate training in evolutionary biology, economics, and statistics, and his personal background living in Sri Lanka, Botswana, Papua New Guinea, Australia, Canada, the United States, and the United Kingdom. Welcome, Michael. Rand Stagen is the CEO of the Stagen Leadership Academy. It was established in 1999. The Academy trains leaders from across North America who are committed to long-term personal development and using their organizational platforms for positive impact. Prior to founding Stagen, Rand was the co-founder and group publisher of Prezio Media, a publisher of newspapers and magazines in the Southwest. A passionate advocate for elevating humanity through business, he's a co-founder and global board member of Conscious Capitalism. Rand is also a board member of the Institute for Cultural Evolution, a think tank developing solutions to overcome the hyperpolarization that threatens American democracy. A sought-after resource within YPO, he's been delivering programs at the chapter, regional, and international level, including multiple global leadership conferences for almost 2 decades. Gentlemen, welcome. Thank you so much. I'm going to hand the baton to you to begin the engaging conversation. And again, thanks everyone for joining us today.
All right. I know you're going to be going off camera, but you'll be there in case we need your help, Michael. So thank you. And on behalf of Conscious Capitalism, I want to welcome all of our participants and our special guest from across the pond, Michael. We've decided to turn on the chat feature and run with scissors a little bit here, since that's not always best practice. But we want to make this as interactive as possible, and I'll do my best in this particular dialogue to keep an eye on the chat and try to bring some of the questions in, which we're going to open for Q&A in about 20 minutes. But for the next little start here, Michael, you and I are just going to set a little context on most importantly, on the new book that you just came out with, that you've got above your shoulder there, and I've got a copy here that I've read. So if you could try your best in the context of knowing that our participants are not just interested in ideas, but interested in application. We're going to be getting into like the concepts, but how do we put these things as capitalists and as practitioners on the ground? Can you just give us a little summary for those that haven't read the book of like, what is A Theory of Everything about? Like, just take a few minutes and just give us a little context, and then we'll double click in.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, I got to say, one of the first things I realized after the book came out is that I kind of made a mistake with the title. A Theory of Everyone, I thought it was very clever. My brother's he's a physicist at MIT. He does inflation. And we were talking about the advancements that have been happening in the human and social sciences, where, for the first time, we kind of had the rules by which human software, the stuff that's going on in our heads, is evolving over time. And it's a kind of major breakthrough on the scale of Darwinian evolution, or the move from alchemy to chemistry thanks to the periodic table, or even Newton or Einstein moving us away from the world is chaotic and controlled by gods to actually there are laws that govern it. And so he said that's kind of like a theory of everything for the human and social sciences, like a theory of everyone. I was like, a theory of everyone, exactly. But the problem, of course, is that the word theory in the vernacular, the way most people use it is kind of like it's a hypothesis. It's this is my guess. I have a theory about why my sister-in-law isn't talking to me anymore, or something like that. So what I mean by a theory of everyone is that we have a framework, a series of mathematical models that are making predictions about the ways that human society evolves over time, what constrains our ability to innovate, to work together, to cooperate, what drives technological growth, and they're predictive in a way that we haven't had before. And that's what a theory of everyone is. And if I were to kind of summarize that really quickly, I think kind of Michael summarized it for me, and that is to say that humans are a new kind of animal that can't be understood just by looking at the rest of the animal kingdom. We have genes that we get from our parents that give us kind of instincts, and we have a lifetime of learning, but we are much brighter and able to do things that the past generation couldn't do in a way that other animals can't. It's hard for them to acquire new skills. We can download new software when it's invented by the previous generation because we have the second line of inheritance that we get from our society. And in my field, we call that software. We call that culture, but you can think of it as software. You can think of it as like the rules or the stuff that's running on your brain's hardware. And so in the book, I kind of lay that out. I say, this is how humans evolved. This is the way that our societies change over time. And this is the way the system works as far as we now understand it. And that's part one of the book. And then part two, I say, okay, look, just assume that what we really have, like, whether you bought it or not in part one, assume that we really have the equivalent of a periodic table, and we can really move the human and social sciences from a kind of alchemy where some people are doing great things that make sense, like creating gunpowder, and other people are really trying to turn lead into gold or the equivalent of that. We can separate that sense from nonsense, and we can think about how to make our companies more innovative. We can think about how to match talent and opportunity better. We can think about what drives human intelligence. We can think about how to improve our education systems, and let's see where that would take us. And that's part 2 of the book. And that's as quick a summary as I can give you, Rand.
That's awesome. Yeah, and I really appreciate you even reflecting upon the title after the book came out and how you're continuing to grow and learn in this, and
Of course,
as
yeah.
you set the context for everybody as it relates to the book. I want to just set a little bit of context for conscious capitalism, and so we are a part as a global nonprofit organization of a number of what we often call fellow travelers that are they're all trying to advance in some form or fashion the practice of business. What makes us at Conscious Capitalism, I believe, as a co-founder and as a board member, I believe that we're very differentiated because we believe in the evolutionary process of the human meaning making of what you just pointed to. And our purpose statement at Conscious Capitalism globally is to elevate humanity through business. So this idea of an elevating, or like a spiral staircase, an evolutionary upward spiral is what I appreciate so much about the sections of the book that kind of set that context. And I'm curious, when you think about this idea of development, where we're sort of transcending and including what came before, and I want to make it really simple for the participants. When we're all born as children, regardless of our country, we're crawling, and then we're walking, and then we're running. Those are developmental benchmarks. We say words, and then we form sentences, and then we form paragraphs. Right. And you can't obviously go from a word to paragraphs. There's a developmental progression. And so when you look at the polarization, Michael, that's going on in the world right now, whether it's political polarization, whether it's racial polarization, whatever flavor you want to take, how are you making sense with your thesis and your book and your research? How are you making sense of the polarization? Because that's definitely on everyone's mind right now.
Absolutely. Yeah, so in the biological sciences, we distinguish between 2 kinds of explanations that we call kind of ultimate explanations and proximate explanations. And these 2 things go hand in hand. So just to give you a quick example, proximately, like, why do people like sweet things? It's because our reward pathways are triggered when we eat something sweet. But an ultimate explanation, and you can talk about the neurochemistry of that, but all of that is proximate mechanism. The ultimate explanation is that our ancestors were eating different kinds of foods, and fruits and vegetables, when they're at their peak of calories and peak of vitamins, tend to have more fructose in them. And so our ancestors developed a preference for that, and a preference against bitterness, which tends to be associated with poisons. And those that had those preferences hardwired succeeded, and at the expense of those that didn't. So when I look at polarization today, there's a proximate explanation and there's an ultimate explanation. The proximate explanation is that we have the media, for example. We have multiple different medias through social media and real life. The Walter Cronkite effect, as some people call it, has disappeared. We don't all get our information from the same source. As a result of that, you can have a different kind of reality, an entirely different view of the world. The internet has also empowered cultural evolution for good and bad. So it has enabled everything to go a lot faster. So people talk about, misinformation. There's loads of misinformation when we were young. We used to think that carrots improved our eyesight at night. And it took a very long time for that to be, corrected. On the internet, everything just happens faster. There's misinformation, and then everybody runs, and tries to correct that misinformation. But the internet also allows us to create new tribes. So you can find a community of people no matter what your most obscure interests might be. So, in the book, I kind of, half-heartedly, I kind of joke about the fact that, are you interested, Rand, in carrying sand in your pockets?
I'm not.
Is that a thing? Not personally. Well, there's about 30,000 people who formed a community on Reddit that are, right?
Yeah.
But of course, that's not as big a community as those who like stapling bread to trees, where there's about 300,000 people who regularly post about this, right? those are whimsical. But on the internet, people, QAnon can find each other, people who have conspiracy theories, people who want to advocate for particular positions, men's rights activists, feminists, whatever you might say. So that's what's proximately going on. But at an ultimate level, uh, our zero-sum biases have been triggered. So in a world where I believe that you and I can both do well by working harder or competing with one another, then business is a great way to drive the whole thing upward, right? So you start a pizza business. And I go, oh, wow, Rand's doing really well with that pizza business. If I live in a positive sum world and I believe that there's enough for everybody, then I go, hey, I need to start a pizza business. I can copy what Rand is doing. All my cultural learning is fired, and I could be just as successful. I'm going to make better pizza than him, and we're going to, and the market benefits from that. You get better pizza, you get different options, you get a wider array of pizza. But if our zero-sum biases are triggered, and I think that the market is limited, then I have a very different psychology. Rand started a pizza business, and now I can't start a pizza business. He's taken a piece of the pie, if you like, that I can't access. And so that's a very different psychology. Now I want to harm you. I want to hurt you. I want to band together with my group and work on how my group can succeed at the expense of yours, because we can't both succeed in this limited space.
Okay,
Which
so I
then
want to, I
steps the
want to,
question.
I
Yeah, go
want to
ahead.
jump in on that because that's
Please,
I
Rand.
want to
Please.
play
Yeah.
back what I'm hearing for the benefit of all of us. So what I'm hearing is there are some proximate explanations for polarization within the innovation of the internet, because you're all about innovation in the book and the role of innovation
Yeah.
and power, which we'll get into in a little bit.
Uh-huh.
And and so we have all these sort of sub tribes and these subgroups that are able to find each other in a way they couldn't before.
Yeah.
And then what I hear you saying is that there's a ultimate explanation which gets at some of this wiring on zero sum versus positive sum. So now let's talk about the relationship between the individual and culture.
Yeah.
So it seems like, at least in an American context, and in a lot of Europe, it seems like a lot of individuals that may 20 years ago or 30 years ago that may have been coming from a more kind of expansive, positive sum, have been almost getting regressing because of this group identity that's showing up in the world, and regressing into these kind of narrative warfares of seeing the worst. So can you talk to us a little bit about the relationship between culture, like I don't know if it's true, but like you hear these stories about how if you've got a bucket of crabs and one crab tries to
Yeah.
Can you talk about the role of group identity with individual zero sum versus positive sum?
Yeah, so in the book, I call these psychological traps, right? So even if the world actually isn't zero sum, so right now, for example, in the United States, there's an energy surplus, and I talk a lot about the role that energy plays in all this. There's good economic growth at the moment, right? But people aren't necessarily clocking onto that, because what they care about is how easy is it for me to get a job? Does my job pay enough for me to get a house where I can start a family, raise my kids? Can my kids go to the good schools? When I get sick, can I access good hospitals? Can I, what is the wait time on these kinds of things? Those are the kind of proximate cues. Now, even so, when there is a reality that things are actually becoming a little bit more difficult, that is the first thing that can trigger it. But then culture comes into play, because some people come from places that really are zero sum, and they can bring those mindsets to other places, right? Where, um, if you believe that someone else's success is indicative of your failure rather than something that you can aspire to and copy and become like that, then you may behave in ways that try to undermine those other people, right? And so then that zero sum behavior can actually create the very circumstances that it assumes the world to be. So if you are focusing on your group at the expense of other groups, then it really does become a group level competition. There isn't enough to go around. So I think the problem right now is that both of those things are going on. There has been a reality where population growth has gone up, but our infrastructure hasn't kept up with that. We don't have as many houses. The nicest places to live, housing prices are out of control. Jobs are okay, but the good schools aren't as easy to get. Some of them are run down, especially here in Europe, which is struggling a bit more than the States is actually. And so when those things are triggered, you're in a cycle rather than a virtuous cycle, which business can often drive. You end up with this destructive cycle. So not a productive cycle where we're working harder to compete with one another, a destructive cycle where we want to harm one another.
And so, you talk in the book a lot about the importance of cooperation
Yeah.
And this idea that when we have energy and an
Hmm.
abundant energy like the Industrial Revolution that you talk about, that energy can create for those societies that are ready the opportunity to innovate with that energy
Yeah.
to cooperate. Okay,
Yeah.
so we've got a lot of evidence. Now I'm going to speak as a capitalist, card carrying
Yeah.
capitalist. We have a lot of evidence that capitalism has been in almost at the data level, an almost irrefutable force for good in the world in the history of humanity. And yet there seem to be groups, going back to this group,
Yeah.
that are saying the problem is capitalism. Capitalism is not part of the solution. Capitalism is actually the enemy.
Yeah.
It's demonized. And as a conscious capitalist, I find myself both confronted, but also misunderstood, because I don't see myself, and I don't think those 38, 40, 50 people who are on the call right now, I don't think that we identify as being the villain in the story. I think we identify as
Yeah.
being well positioned to evolve consciously, to evolve capitalism to be its next kind of version. But help us
Yeah.
understand how to deal with the attack that's coming to capitalists.
Yeah, so I'm a recent British citizen, so I can say, to quote my fellow countryman, Winston Churchill, he said, "Democracy is a terrible system, except for all the other ones." It's true of
Yeah,
capitalism too, right? Capitalism might be a terrible system, except for everything else, that's been tried. So, I mean, I think where this is coming from is that people feel like capitalism isn't working for them, but they don't know what the counterfactual is, and they aren't trained in or haven't really thought about, well, how are things priced in a world that's not capitalist? Where is the information for some kind of central planner to be able to allocate where things should go in a world that's not driven by supply and demand, for example? But that doesn't mean that, there's like a single capitalism that we could defend, and this is the right audience to say this. Capitalism can be made more efficient, and that's really, what I try to push for in the second half of my book is a better capitalism, is a more efficient capitalism, is a capitalism that better matches opportunity and talent, and that distributes control over our energy, which is ultimately distributing control over how our goods and services, which goods and services are produced with our energy budget, to the people that create more for everyone. So, some of those early wins were even things like companies. So people take modern companies for granted, like, that I can go work for Microsoft or Google, or I can go pick a company to work for. That's a relatively modern innovation that has its roots in like 10th century guilds in Europe, really. Prior to that, most companies are family-based companies. You can't join the company unless you're part of that family.
right.
But when you open up the company to anyone, you've immediately made it more efficient. It means that I can take my talent to the person who's going to pay me the most and that's most well aligned with my interests and my goals. You've made capitalism more efficient. And as a result of that, you've empowered what we call cultural group selection. And I think you're familiar with that, which is this evolutionary process of solution finding in a landscape where innovations are very difficult to find. So what we want to do is have more of those kinds of perfections to capitalism, if you like, improvements on capitalism. And I think that's the way to fight it, is to say, hey, I hear you. I hear you that you feel like capitalism isn't working for you, but that doesn't mean we need to go the other way, try to abolish capitalism. Capitalism has lifted more people out of poverty than any other system we're aware of. Any other system, far more than just charity alone.
Can you
Capitalism
can you
has
because we
done
got we
more.
got a we got a question from Eric
Yeah.
Moss, and him saying, can you provide a little bit more of the evidence, which your book does, the graphs?
Yeah.
But can you just take a second, and for those people that don't know what happened prior to the Industrial Revolution, and maybe mention 5 or 6 of those domains of transformation from a standpoint of
Yeah.
metrics?
Yeah, I mean, in recent times, you can see the link across the world. Causally, you can see the link between development and the introduction of markets, and progress and a better life on just about any metric that we might care about, right? So people's health, people's lifespans, child survival rates, all of these things go up. And the Industrial Revolution, as you mentioned, what was a mixture of capitalism having access to energy. So it's not just that, like in the book, I talk about a key metric called energy return on investment, which is the amount of energy it takes to get some amount of energy back. It's the amount of excess energy that your society has. But the mere presence of excess energy doesn't mean that you'll cooperate and have a great society. The Democratic Republic of Congo is quite energy rich, so is Russia. But that doesn't mean that they're doing very well. You have to be able to cooperate and access that. And what capitalism does is it creates this way of searching through the space of innovations and driving up cooperation, because the companies that can create more value, and you only create value because you're producing things that other people want to buy, the rest of society want to consume goods and services. The people who can do that better are rewarded with greater control. And so larger companies grow only if they can provide value to society. At least that's the old form of capitalism that you kind of opened with.
Yeah.
And
So
so
I want,
there's two.
you know,
Yeah.
I want to pause because you're going so fast that I want to be
Sorry.
sensitive
Yeah.
to those that don't pay attention to the data. Now, I'm not gonna quote your book, but you can quote your book on this. You went real fast and say across any metric that we would care about. I mean, let's get specific. My
Yeah.
understanding at the research is that prior to the Industrial Revolution, most people were illiterate. Most people died before the age of 30. Most people were in poverty, like 90%. And like, how different
Yeah.
is it now, just a few hundred years later?
250 years ago, 12% of the world could read and write. Today, 12% of the world can't read and write.
Okay.
Right? It's been a complete reversal. Like in one of the key graphs in the book, you can see all of these metrics that I kind of described. And I didn't even bother putting them on like the clear metrics. You just see it's just so obvious what's going on here. We lived in a Malthusian world. We lived in a zero-sum world where anything you got was at my expense. You took over a piece of the land. You took over the arable space where you could grow things. You took over anything. And I could only take it back through warfare, through conquest. That was the only way for things to improve until we hit the Industrial Revolution. And then all of those metrics just skyrocket upwards, right? So it's not, we had capitalist systems before. It wasn't just capitalism. It was that capitalism was suddenly empowered by energy. Energy is the great multiplier on human capabilities, right? It's a great multiplier on human effort. Like, just think about how much quicker you can cook something in a microwave or on a stove than having to light a fire. Think about building an IKEA bookshelf with a manual screwdriver versus a power screwdriver. Think about walking somewhere versus driving there. Energy can empower everything that we do. And so what happened, just to be a little bit more specific, in the ground, we found millions of years worth of stored sunlight. So photosynthesis is converted into chemical form by plants. So zooplankton into oil and natural gas, peat into black rock that we call coal. And that is a dense, powerful thing that we were then able to put to work thanks to, capitalist companies and so on, right? Industrialization was those two things combined. And then every metric goes up. And initially, there's a great divergence. So Europe takes off, begins conquering the world, and the rest of the world is kind of just stagnating. And so, but then what happens is that as those innovations in non-family corporations, liberal democracies, free markets, and so on start to spread around the world, you start to see a great convergence where these other economies start to catch up, right? I talk about the innovation of the shipping container as a key moment. There was a huge efficiency that led to the rise of Asian manufacturing. If you, and stop me, Rand, I feel like I'm on a bit of a monologue, but if you look at all these old videos of people at the docks, they're rolling barrels, they're carrying ropes, nobody wanted to ship anything, right? Like, it would sit there for weeks because it was so difficult. And, then along comes McLean and he says, hey, I've got trucks. I'm just going to put things in my trucks and drive the trucks onto the ships. And then he's like,
Yep.
hey, these engines are taking a lot of space. I'm just going to put the back of my trucks on the ship. And the shipping container is born. And after that, the whole world benefits from year-round produce that isn't grown locally, to the point where sometimes it's not more ecologically efficient to eat locally because it's better. The transport cost is so low that it's better to grow your tomatoes somewhere else and ship them than to grow them in a heated greenhouse, right? And as
So
a result of
let's
that, Japan rises and everyone else rises. Yeah.
let's pause. I'm going to pretend that I'm a college student, and I'm going to
Yeah.
pretend I'm listening to you right now. You're a college
Uh-huh.
professor, so I'm just one of your kids, right? And
Yeah.
I'm going to say, Professor, it sounds like you're like a right-wing conservative guy. It sounds like you're like pro-capitalist. I mean, don't you see that capitalism is destroying the environment. Like, didn't you see the movie Don't Look Up? I mean, come on. Like, don't we need to actually stop using microwaves? Don't we need to stop using shipping containers? I mean, we need to take our energy usage down, because otherwise you're rearranging the chairs on the Titanic. What's the point, Professor? Like, shouldn't we stop using energy?
Yeah, so I mean that is correct in the sense that as capitalism also or the use of this energy also destroys the environment, and that has been the major cost that we're now dealing with. But the answer is not stagnation. The answer is not to kind of pull back. The answer is greater energy abundance, because all of those problems get solved if you have cleaner forms of energy. So if you have nuclear, for example, you have solar, you can use that energy abundance that you have at your disposal to clean up the mess that we've created. You can sequester the carbon as needed. You can desalinate the oceans. These are all energy problems, right? You can allocate them wherever you. I don't know if any people in the audience have been to places like the Middle East or Phoenix for that matter, right? These are driven by our control over energy to create life in a desert, right? To create this abundance in a desert, and it is entirely driven by energy. Another way to say this is if you look at the places that are able to look after their environments, that have the excess wealth to do that, they are the wealthiest places. They can afford not to clear their rainforests in order to grow food because they have better technologies and more energy efficient technologies, and so can grow their foods with less of an environmental impact than some of these poorer places. The only difference is that those people are living a poorer lifestyle. They're using less energy, not because of some efficiencies, but they're using it because they're just consuming less. And that's kind of the world that, people like degrowthers want to pull us back into. But I'm acknowledging all these problems. I'm very much, not some kind of right-wing extremist. Like, these are very real problems. But the answer is greater energy abundance, not less.
Because that's a counterintuitive, idea, right? So it's like, and I know you've talked about how not just in the book, but in some of your material that's online, in some of your
Yeah.
webinars, this idea that if you look at the richest societies in the world today,
Yeah.
they're actually in a position to use innovation to try to actually counteract some of the historic shadows of
Yeah.
capitalism. Can you talk about what's happening in Australia? And if Australia
Yeah.
was poor, they might not have been able to do what they're doing, because I think that's a good story.
Yeah, I mean, one of my examples is, so as a kid, I went snorkeling. So I grew up in Australia. When I was younger, I went snorkeling in the Great Barrier Reef, and when I was a little kid, it was amazing. Like, things were great. By about the early 2000s, they were bleached coral. I mean, it was dying thanks to climate change, right? Um, it's because Australia is so rich, in fact, it has the highest household wealth of any major country in the world, that they're able to invest in restoring that barrier reef. And when I, recently went there last year, actually, I was astonished at these, they have these amazing hexagonal structures that I think it was 3M, I'd have to double check, had invested in, that they were dropping into these locations to help the coral regrow. Now, there's still a loss in biodiversity, right? There are still problems, but the point is Australia has that excess budget. Whereas if you look at other places that are still burning dirty coal, and still burning things that are, producing fumes in our atmosphere, it's because they don't have other options. They don't have the cleaner options at their disposal. But there are, why I'm both a pessimist and an optimist is there are technologies that can let us get through this. Solar is cheaper than it's ever been. Wind isn't amazing, but nuclear, small modular reactors, micro reactors, the kind of reactors we've used for a long time, and in technologies like aircraft carriers or submarines, they're available to us. And fusion, for the first time, there's an ecosystem, a capitalist ecosystem, if you like, a startup ecosystem around fusion that makes it a possibility. And of course, if we reach that, game's over. We've solved it. We'd be the
Yeah, so
first generation of a galactic civilization.
I think for the audience, I mean, it's really important, and I encourage everyone to get the book, and at a minimum, watch a little few more of your Q&A with the longer format webinars or YouTube videos that are out there. What I'm really appreciating about your work is you recognizing the role of energy in all of this. And this is very provocative, right? Because there are a lot of people that just assume, let's go back to the villain, that the villain is energy. In one of your webinars, a student or someone in the audience basically said the following statements, and I was really sad by this. And he said, we all know that the oil companies want to destroy the planet.
Right.
And it's like, I find myself both empathizing with this assumption that people that run energy companies are evil. Okay. I can try to put myself in those shoes. I work with CEOs of energy companies. I work with CEOs who actually are in the fossil fuel space. And these are human beings who are saying we have to make the transition, but we can't do it in a binary way. It is naive to think that we can shut off our current use of energy and just go to something. It's utopian. We can't, it's not binary. It's an evolutionary process. And I don't experience these human beings as evil and exploitative and trying to destroy the planet for their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. How do you reconcile this? Because I imagine you heard it. You heard it in your
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think about people as running software, as being influenced by the people around them, and ultimately, people are people, and they have incentives, right? Um, what the person was expressing is a commonly held view, first off. And it's also probably a frustration with what's going on, but they haven't really thought through the counterfactuals, about the scale of the transition that we're talking about, and the loss in quality of life that's being asked for if we were to if we were to transition without kind of clear pathways to get there. What energy abundance gives you is possibilities, is options. That doesn't necessarily mean that we'll use them for good. But when we talk about incentives, I think that most people do want to live in a clean environment. Like, most people do want to breathe clean air and drink clean water. And they don't they resort to things that are not clean when they don't have those options. So, I think we're seeing shifts in other places. I have a field site in Namibia and Angola, and it was amazing to see, like, the rise of solar and people going off grid there, just because they have abundant sunlight. That doesn't make sense everywhere, but it makes sense there, right? I'm pleased to see the investments that are going on in the nuclear space, for example. So I think it's very easy to demonize the other side, and that's a mistake, because we only get places by realizing we're all in this together. We're trying to figure this thing out together, and understanding why, like, the best version, steel manning the best version of the opposition's argument is the only way that we make progress. Realizing we're on the same page, we're in the same boat.
Yeah, and let's make sure that the group understands, and this is another takeaway. This idea of steel manning, a straw man would be that comment, which is like, here's my assumption of the opposition. The energy companies are trying to destroy the world. And so because it's a straw man, I can just knock it down with my attack. Where, for everyone who doesn't know this term, steel manning is, I have an opposing view to someone, I'm debating someone, and I'm able to articulate their position, which may be abhorrent to me, but I can articulate their position in such a way where they say to me, you just articulated my position better than I can articulate my own position.
Exactly.
You understand me. Now I will try to understand you, and we can actually lean in and grow. Iron sharpening iron would be like a way of talking about this. But I don't want our group to miss the importance that this demonizing is incredibly destructive, and it's not generative. Can you kind of speak to, like, we're going back to the zero sum?
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. I'm a scientist, right? Like, my goal is not to win the argument. My goal isn't even to publish the paper. My goal is to figure out the truth. And I only get there by seeing the best version of the people who disagree with me, their argument. And even if they might be terrible at making that argument, maybe they can't articulate it well, I'm going to help you make your argument, so that then, we can argue with one another, and you're going to try to help me make my argument, and we arrive at the truth in that way. And I think that's the antidote, right? Even in our interpersonal interactions, that's the antidote to a lot of polarization. Is to say that
can you say that again? And here's what I want everyone to listen to this time. You could be on this call and get off, and we're going to get off in a few minutes, and be like, wow, that was interesting theoretical, but how does it impact me as a leader today? And Michael, what you just said is an actual way of putting the idea of being a scientist in truth on the ground. Can you say it again? Doesn't have to be the exact way of, like, helping the other see the best version of their argument. Like, say that one more
That's
time.
right. Like, look, the world is complicated. It's today's truths or tomorrow's falsehoods. I want to know why you think the things you think. And I want to create the best version of why you think the things you think so that I can really evaluate whether that's a better view on reality, whether that's a greater truth that I can then act on, right? Like I can't solve a problem unless I understand it. And so it doesn't help if you've already decided what the answer is. If you say to me, like, the root of this cause is greed, it's envy, it's racism, it's sexism, it's whatever, they don't explain anything. I want to understand exactly what's going on, what's driving this. And it's only there, it's only like seeing why people are making the decisions they make, why they think the things they think, and in conversation with one another, in conversation with the people you most vehemently disagree with, that we can arrive at the truth. And as I said, that really is the antidote to polarization.
Yeah.
It's the realization that we are not enemies. We are people who disagree with one another, but we're in this together, right? We benefit if we can both arrive at a better truth.
And you've just articulated for the conscious capitalists on the call. We probably have some that are coming to your first conversation. At Conscious Capitalism, we subscribe to this idea of a big tent. And a big tent is about inclusion. And inclusion is something far more than the surface of what my skin color is. The inclusion of diversity is diversity of viewpoints, which Michael's just pointing to.
Yeah.
And this idea that when we're in a big tent and when we're inclusive, we actually create the conditions for this kind of, like, let's call it dynamic tension, right?
Yeah.
Where, and I, at our Conscious Capitalism CEO Summit a couple of months ago, we talked about this idea of a rubber band. And if Michael and I are on different sides of an argument, and when we feel that tension, what we as human beings want to do is we want to make that tension go away. And we make that tension go away by straw manning and destroying and trying to see the worst in the other, as opposed to saying, how do we, and Michael just hit it beautifully, how do we actually hold that tension? And I love, it's a takeaway for me, how do we help the other make the best version of their argument, even if they can't do it? And then how do we enroll them to help us make the best version of our argument and then get back into the debate? I mean, because someone on one of the comments was about the spiritual work. And if in conscious capitalism, a lot of people are drawn to this idea of consciousness and this sense that we are all a part of something bigger than ourselves. We're not independent agents. We're a part of humanity. And so I know we've got just a few minutes before we've got to jump off, but Michael, anything you want to share as it relates to, like, an unconditional inclusion? Just because you see the world differently doesn't mean you're not welcome at the table. It's just that can you talk about, maybe end with a little bit of dynamic tension here?
I mean, I'm not sure what to add to what I said. Other than to say, I think I talk about a lot of different concepts in the book, right? And some incentive audits, for example, like, there's something called a bias blind spot. None of us can see our bias. And so actually we rely on other people to see that bias for us. And actually that's how science works. Like, science doesn't work because I run an experiment and then, other people go, wow, my mind has changed. Like, you've opened my eyes. Thank you. No, we're people, right? And we defend our positions as best we can, but there are observers, and those observers are evaluating. Like, science works because we have created a system where we are incentivized to show each other that we're wrong, but we also have a common basis of evidence, a common reality upon which we can show what we're wrong, a way of approaching theory, a way of approaching evidence. And that's why science moves forward, not because scientists are, somehow more enlightened than the rest of us. And I think that kind of scientific viewpoint that you also find, by the way, in business, right? So a lot of entrepreneurs know that you can only solve things with the truth. Like, only accurate views of the world are going to get you there, even when those are difficult truths. That's the only way to get there. So the closer you can get to that ground reality, the better off the company is. And the closer, when you create that system, like, it's very difficult to create a system from scratch. What we can do is create like I said, a better capitalism, or a system that is evolving better toward a direction we want to go.
Yeah, I made a note of that. Science works because we are incentivized to show each other where we are wrong. That's beautiful. And this idea that that's the same thing that markets do with customers. And whether we have product market fit, whether the marketplace wants our ideas, and if we're off and we're wrong, then the actual marketplace will tell us we're wrong by not buying our products.
Exactly. And you can't know that in advance.
Yeah.
That's why you need a market.
I've never thought about the scientific method and the free market capitalism having such a
they're the same dynamic.
They're
the same dynamic. Yeah, exactly right. Yeah.
All right. Well, Michael Higgs, I am going to bring you back on, and you put a link in the survey. I did my best to scan the chats and the questions and try to weave them in. I'm sorry I didn't call people out by name on your questions, but we had a lot of questions, and I did do my best to kind of bring them in. And my hope for everyone is that this is not some abstract, let's go have a cup of hot tea and just think about these things, that we're actually asking ourselves, what can we do to operationalize and put these on the ground? And Michael gave us a really good one about helping others create the best version of their argument that we disagree with.
Yeah.
So Michael Higgs, over to you.
Yeah, I just I'd want to thank everyone for the lively chat. I think the huge takeaway is, as Rand signaled, that let's improve our critical thinking and let's challenge one another. Let's aspire for that dynamic tension. I know we went a little bit over. I did not want this one to end. This was a fantastic conversation. Michael, Rand, thank you so much for joining us. Everyone who joined today's session, thank you to you as well. Rand mentioned there's a link in the survey, or excuse me, there's a survey link in the chat. Do fill it out. It informs our future programming. And we'd love to have you back for another session. So again, Michael, Rand, thank you so much. Everyone, a recording will be available. So stay tuned to your email if you registered for the event. Have a great day, everyone.
Thanks very much.
Thanks, Michael.